Welcome back to chickens. So, yep, this is the recent reads. The weather is already starting to feel like summer, even though it's May. So, yeah, we're doing a recent reads. You watched my last video if you want an explanation of why I'm not doing the reading challenges anymore. But yes, we're doing the recent reads. So yeah, in this recent reads we got what I think as of right now is going to be some of the top contenders for they're going to be on the best books of 2025. So yeah, that's exciting. And also there's there's been a bit of a shift, you could say. So let's get into it. First book I read was The Solace of Water by Elizabeth Byler Younts. Now, to be clear, I started this book first, but I didn't finish it until after I read the next two books I'll be talking about. So, and I also want to tell the story of how this book came on my radar. That's a pretty funny story. So in 2023, I read a little book called Fire by Night by Lynn Austen. And while this is a part of I read this in the summer where I didn't really like anything I read, this book, Fire by Night, was probably the worst one that I read. And maybe not necessarily worst as in badly written, but worst as in legitimately problematic. But I can't really explain why that is without giving spoilers. But if you want to see some of my spoiler-filled thoughts on this book, you can watch my first video. I'll link it in the description. So yeah, but um, for some reason, when I looked reviews of this book on Goodreads for Fire by Night, it seems the majority of people who read this book loved this book, and that had me at the time kind of like, what is wrong with you people? But before I knew about the feature where you can click a star rating and see all the reviews in that star rating, I somehow was able to find a 2-star review that aligned with my thoughts on the book. So when I made my Goodreads account, I followed that person, and then after uh, after following that person for a little bit, one of the first books I saw that came up was that they had rated this book, The Solace of Water, 5 stars. So I was like, oh, I gotta add this to my TBR. So this book. This book, The Solace of Water, is a historical book. It's about 3 women. We have Delilah, an African American woman and a preacher's wife, and she has just moved her family to a new town after the death of her son. And then we also have Emma, an Amish woman who's got problems of her own. Her husband is an alcoholic, and she's been kind of enabling that by helping him hide it from the people in their community. But she's also got her own secrets that she's dealing with. And then we also have Delilah's oldest daughter, Sparrow. And Sparrow knows that she is responsible for her brother's death because she was supposed to be watching him during that time, and because of that there's tension between her and her mother because Delilah can't seem to forgive her. Yeah, Sparrow and Delilah meet Emma, and there's kind of Sparrow starts to connect with her first, and Emma kind of sees her as the daughter she never had, but then eventually her and Delilah connect, but then things happen in their town. So, yeah. When I first started reading this, I was kind of like, wait, is this a Christian book? Because I guess, I don't know. But then I looked into it a bit, and yep, this is a Christian book. Though I will say, with like the Christian stuff, I wouldn't say it's like in your face pushy about it. Although I feel like any book that has a positive portrayal of Christianity, or maybe not even a positive, just like not negative portrayal of Christianity, at least someone, is gonna be upset. So maybe I shouldn't even mention that. So yeah, when I first started reading it, like before I read the next two books, I got to about 32%, and I wasn't really liking it because I wasn't being drawn in. But then, you can see more of my thoughts on this in the drawn in problem video. I started to not like my need to be drawn in. And so with this book, I was really trying, okay, I'm gonna try to see what aspects I can like, see how much I can like this book without being drawn in. And it kind of worked. Yeah, so this is a really great story. I liked the relationships, like, especially between, I think, Sparrow and Emma, and I guess when Delilah and Emma started to be friends as well. I liked that. Although, I'm sure if you hadn't gathered from the synopsis, it is kind of more of a heavy book, but it's ultimately, there's themes of forgiveness and also redemption, and like it is pretty good. Oh, I'd forgotten about this until I looked at my notes again, but um this book, this we have Emma as an Amish woman in this book, and from what I've seen of Elizabeth Byler and Younts' other book, there's at least one other book about an Amish girl. So I know I could easily look this up, but I would be interested to know what this author's connection to the Amish is. So, and then I don't really have, come to think of it, I gave it 4 stars, but I don't know if I have. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, that even though I was trying to like it without being drawn in, there was some parts where I was more drawn in. So yeah, and then so I don't, I can't think of any like glaring problems with this book though. One thing, and this is probably more of a me problem, is that I was a little confused on what time period this is supposed to take place in. Like, I think when I first heard about it, it said somewhere that it takes place in the 1950s, but then in the book, there are references to Martin Luther King. So, and maybe this is just my ignorance, but I was kind of like, wait, wasn't all that stuff in the 1960s? I mean, maybe that stuff started in the 1950s, so maybe it could make sense, but yeah. So yeah, yes, it's good. So the next book, we have a little video introduction, initial thoughts for that. So I will play that right now.
So I'm going on vacation. On vacation, I'm gonna be reading this. One of my most anticipated reads, although with some of the disappointments from some of them affected. I really want to like this book. I really want to love this book, but I don't know if I'm going to. Apparently, I found this out even from a review, not even from like the back of the book. But apparently, this is about a social media influencer. So, should be interesting. Please let me. Okay, I'm gonna try to do everything I can to like this book. Ah.
Before we get into talking about this book, first we must appreciate this cover. Although on this camera, you're not really getting across the whole beautifulness of this cover. You just go, just look up this book, this cover, and you can appreciate it there. Okay, because this, yeah. So, this book is about. I looked at the back. I know what it's about. So this book is about a social media influencer named Molly McKenzie, and her engaging personality has garnered her over 600,000 followers. So yeah, it's a lot of people. And her manager, who's also her boyfriend, talks to her about this new opportunity. I think it's to host a Netflix show, but there's a few things she has to do in order to get, and one of the things is to attach her name to a cause. And so she chooses this ministry called The Bridge. And what The Bridge is in this world, it's this kind of, I guess, transitional house for kids who have aged out of the foster care system. And the goal of the ministry is to teach these kids practical life skills and also, because it's more of a Christian, to help them have a relationship with God. So yeah, Molly applies to volunteer in this place that at first she's turned down, but then they eventually let her in and she's doing very well. She's connecting with the girls there and also connecting with the director, Mr. Silas Whitaker. But then things happened. Her influence in life and this life is starting to like conflict, and so yeah, and as the title suggests, she starts to learn what really matters. Okay, so if you, I mentioned in my little introduction thing that I really wanted to like this book, but I was worried I wasn't going to, and I think that's because before this point, before finishing this book, the books that I had rated the highest before was books that I read during one of my reading challenges where being drawn in wasn't as relevant because I was going to continue reading regardless. So, and there, hardly any of the books before then that I read in between were really drawing me in. So I guess, I think I was just worried I wasn't ever going to be drawn in again. So, but I was wrong. I was wrong. I was very drawn in to this book. Yes, it is, and other people did say on Goodreads that this is a page turner. Now, in my review on Goodreads, I did kind of realize later that I was kind of looking around for reasons to give it the rating that I did. So I don't know if I should mention those reasons here. Although the relationships um, that Molly develops with the girls was very sweet. And I'd heard some Christian booktuber say that like Christian fiction nowadays is more clean fiction than Christian fiction. So with that in mind, I was kind of expecting not much content, but there was more. I mean, maybe it wasn't that much, but there was more than I expected in this book. So I ended up giving this 4.5 stars, which, yeah, because there was really only two problems that I had. I mean, I was a little hesitant about the romance at first since Molly was already in a relationship, but thankfully in the story, I don't think this is a spoiler, but she breaks up with her boyfriend before she starts falling for the main guy. So, but I give 4.5 because there are really only two like minor issues I had with one. The thing when this ministry is like talking to the kids about they ask them questions and they mention things like, oh, what made you feel like your truest self, and with that kind of language I was kind of like, I don't know about that. And this is the second issue is kind of more like, so like an event would happen in the book and then you get Molly's thoughts about it after, and the conclusions she would draw from those events had me kind of like, did I miss something? Other than that, I really liked it. And then thinking about it now, I was kind of like, maybe this book doesn't deserve 4.5 stars, but I enjoyed it enough to give it 4.5 stars, okay? So, yeah. So after All That Really Matters, there's also a second book, which I think it's only going to be a duology with these two books because the series is called Mackenzie Family Romance, and through these two books, there's only like two Mackenzie family that can really be a plot. So yeah. Um, So the second book is called All That It Takes, and we also gotta appreciate this cover. Oh, you can see it better in this time. Oh, okay. Like, are these actually pretty covers, or am I just weird with the kind of covers I like? So, anyways, and I'm not sure how to sum up this book. Okay, there's a book. There's another book like this, where it's kind of like the plot isn't confusing, but it's like how do I sum this up? Like, what do they need to know and what's not considered spoilers? So, I'll say, when I looked up kind of the synopsis before reading this book to kind of prepare myself for what I was getting into, and this is about, of course, Mackenzie. No, not. I knew I was gonna do that. Call them by their last name, but Molly's twin brother Miles. But this is also about Molly's best friend Val, and I was kind of like, ah! So yeah, so Val has moved to Washington with her son to help out Molly in her new business, but she is staying. She's basically a tenant living in the second floor of the house of Molly's twin brother Miles. So yeah, there's that. So you kind of get, I guess, this forced proximity, and then she's also then what else do I say? So Val's kind of been entered this like film competition, and Miles is he's not a fan. He works at the church. He's like, I guess, kind of a pastor, but um he's not a fan of how things are being handled there. So yeah, and things happen. So yeah. So 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 because I like the first book so much, I was expecting to like this book just as much, but I gave this 3 stars. So so I've seen the kind of like this is interesting. I like see videos come up in my feed, but I like never watch them. But I remember the thumbnails and what they're. And I guess one thing that was kind of this video that I never watched was kind of gonna mention was that it seems like in the bookish community, only 4 and 5 star ratings are like is what makes a book considered good. And even though I never watched that video, I have seen other booktubers saying their reviews, like if they give a book 3 stars or about 5 stars, they'll say, "Oh, it's not a bad rating." I feel like for me, with like 3 star ratings, it can mean either one of two things. It can either mean I liked it, but it wasn't spectacular, or it can mean I didn't really like it, but it doesn't deserve 2.5 or 2 stars. And this book is more of the latter. I think the main problem was at the time was that I was really drawn in. So when realizing that, I was kind of like, what happened? How come the first book was such a page turner, but then this one isn't? So yeah, and there were also some things I didn't really like, but I don't think I could talk about one because it's not mentioned on the back, so it's probably spoiler. But one can this is a very minor problem, but it's one that I'm like it's I don't I, I've seen this in like Christian fiction before, and I don't really like it. I don't like seeing like Bible misconceptions like they're presented as like correct. So like one that was in this book, and I saw this in one other book where they so Miles is talking to like his mentor, and his mentor kind of says to him, "Oh, you gotta listen for God's still small voice," and I know that is talked about in when in well I guess Kings when the story with Elijah and all that, but it's framed. The problem is that it's framed in such a way where it's like as if God only speaks in His still small voice. When it's like, have you read the Bible? More often than not, God speaks pretty intensely. So yeah, and again, I know that's probably more of a me problem. That's me kind of being judgmental of other Christians who don't know their Bible as well, but like still bothers me. So yeah, this was unfortunate. Right. So the next book I read was Bound by Victoria Lynn. So Victoria Lynn, she's probably most known for her Chronicles of Illyria series. So I'll put something right here to mention those books. Um, so I haven't read that series, and this book and another book on my TBR. It seems, according to Goodreads, I picked her two least popular books, which I didn't do that on purpose. Just those were the only ones that sounded interesting to me. And it seems like also from Goodreads that this book, Bound, was Victoria Lynn's first book, which um that makes sense. So this book is about two kids, Levi and Casey, and they are both running away from their pretty abusive households, and they meet at the train station, or I'm not sure if it was a train or if it was a subway, some kind of station, and then they kind of decide that they're going to run away together, and they do, but then things happen, and so they find this couple that is willing to take them in. They take care of them, but they also tell them about Jesus and stuff. But then other things happen. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good synopsis. So I mentioned like in the review that Levi and Casey, which I didn't. I guess I might as well mention it. Levi is 14 and Casey, it seems, is 8. Um, so they were coming from abusive households, and what kind of surprised me is they like get into talking about what these kids have gone through, like right off the bat, pretty much, which is kind of like, like I forgot to mention this with like the salts of the water, but usually like heaviness doesn't really get to me, but this, it wasn't that it got to me, but it's more like, whoa, we're going there right away. So yeah, and then so this book is interesting. I was drawn in more than I expected, but it was also kind of like not, I don't know if I would say fast paced, but it was like kind of rushed in the section, like a scene would be described somewhat normally paced, but then we'd move on to something else pretty quickly, which, like, yeah. And then I I wanted to mention this in my Goodreads review, but then I didn't because it felt kind of mean. So I'll try to say this nicely, but like with like the Christian stuff, this book, it felt kind of awkwardly placed in the story. Like, okay, so here's the thing. In like theory, this Christian message should work and it shouldn't feel forced because it should be basically um Christian couple takes in these these kids with a lot of trauma, and they not only tell them about Jesus but show them Jesus' love through their actions. That in theory that should work and it should not be forced. But in execution, it for some reason feels like the author was like, "Oh, we've got to add this in," which like, yeah, and I guess again, like I said, this kind of makes sense because this is not only Victoria Lynn's first book, but also from the sounds of it, she was pretty young when she wrote this. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think I gave it 2.75 stars, which I know, but like, yeah. Next book I read was Out of My Mind by Sharon Draper. So, okay, so as you can see, with all the physical books, I feel the need to comment on the covers. But this is different. So this is like the cover for the movie. This is so I saw this book like when I was at the bookstore in 2024, and I saw this book with this book cover with this movie cover on the shelves. But for some reason, my brain didn't make the connection that meant this book, the movie for this book came out that year in 2024. We don't have time to get into how I found out it was came out this year. All right, so this book is about a girl named Melody, and she has photographic memory. So I remember learning about photographic memories. Basically, people with photographic memory, they literally remember everything and they can't really forget everything. And the way this is explained to me was that because so much of these people's brains is being used to remember things, they can't really function much in other ways. So our Melody, she can't walk, she has to be in a wheelchair, she can't really talk. Um, she needs help feeding herself and she can only eat like soft foods. She needs help going to the bathroom and like all these things. But because of her photographic memory, she is very smart. But because but because she can't really talk, no one really knows how smart she is. But then they find a way for her to be able to communicate, and then people start to realize how smart she is. But then things happen. So yeah. Um. So mm, these notes that I have are kind of like my thoughts have evolved, so I'm not sure how much I might forget things. So yeah, this is I saw this I found the well I'd heard of this book before, but I saw it under like people who liked Stargirl also like this book. So as I was expecting this kind of. I didn't include this in my most anticipated reads, but I expected I would like this similarly to Stargirl. And in the beginning, I did. It started off as a 4.5 stars, and I was like, oh yeah! But then it just, I don't know, it just stopped reminding me of Stargirl, and there were some things that came up that I was kind of like, I don't really like that. Now, this was somewhat out of my comfort. Well, I didn't know how they were gonna do this because the girl with photographic memory. I was like, how are you gonna do this? But it did work pretty well. So I ended up giving this like 4 stars. It might be 4.25, but hmm, I don't. Hmm. Yeah, it was a real good. Um, I don't know what else to say. So last book I'll be talking about in this video is Eyes for My Off-Limits Crush by Ella Marie. So, I get a little confused on what trope this is supposed to be. I think when I first heard of this, I thought it was a brother's best friend trope. I was mistaken. I found out before I started reading that this is best friend's brother trope. I tend to get those two mixed up, but they are different, and I guess all that it takes is also technically best friend's brother trope. So this is the other one where it's like, how do I give a synopsis on this one? Okay, I'll try. So this is about Grace Carter, and her she has had a crush on her best friend's brother for years, but she thinks she can't let anyone know, and she thinks that they might not work together because he seems very attached to his small town, and she is a city girl through and through. But then he comes over, and things happen. I don't know what else I can say. So, one interesting thing I found out is that this this book is not a Christian book. Like we talked about a good amount of Christian books. The first 4 books we talked about were Christian books. So this book, Eyes for My Off-Limits Crush, is not a Christian book, but it is written by a Christian author, which I haven't looked into this too much, but it seems like a lot of the authors who write like clean rom clean romances are Christian. So yeah, yeah. So this was cute. Well, more so in the beginning where it's like the girls so like yeah. Then I gave it 3 stars. This is more of like when I liked it 3 stars. There was a few things that I didn't love, but it's like again it's more of a me problem. So yeah. So that is it for this video. That was all the books talked about. If you paid attention to what I say in the ratings, you might start to figure out which books might be in the best books of 2025, but I guess we'll see. what the rest of this year has to offer. So, goodbye.